Hello everybody, my name is Richard Procter. I'm the Joint Managing Director of Vizeum South Africa, and today I'll be doing the first lecture of the training course, which is chapter 1 of the textbook, which is developing a standpoint for media. So let's get started. The textbook, as you probably know, is the nuts and bolts of media planning, and this is what we're going to be following throughout this course. The purpose of what chapter 1 is about. It's really about identifying the key considerations to be balanced and reveals the relationship or chemistry that must be created for effective planning to be achieved. So this is really the chapter where we try and understand what is the philosophy of media planning and strategy, and how can we unpack this in the modern day of today, of yesterday, today, and the future as well. So really the one thing that remains focused is the changes is human behavior. That really is the one thing that does change all the time. And if we focus on changes in human behavior, rather than the message, we'll get what's required. The next thing we would like to talk about is really how media planning has evolved through the ages. Now, in different markets around the world, this is happening at different stages, and we may not all be in the same stage, but there is definitely a linear process that's happening about the evolution of media through the ages. So if we look at stage 1, which really, I don't think most people, we have moved away from this stage 1 over here, which is, although in some markets this is actually coming back again, but largely stage 1 is the full service agency, where you had, the focus was creative development. The role of media planning was very much to support creative. It wasn't really the focus at all. Then stage 2, really we looked at media, we look at the birth of media independence. And this was quite a big step that happened. And in some markets this is still happening. And in other markets this certainly has happened already. And I think that's Vizeum, where I work globally, that's absolutely a media independence, for example. And so that's, you know, in 40 markets around the world, or even bigger than that, we find that this has definitely happened. What is the focus over here is really deliver economy of scale. We need, that's why media independence were born, to get better value for the client. So if we put all our buying in one place, how can we get a better deal, or how can we leverage our power with the media owners out there? So really that's how that media independence were born. Then the planning, the role of media planning was really, we almost were extension of the media owner. We were there to help sell their stuff to our clients. So instead of them going to 100 people, or sorry, to 100 creative agencies, they ended up going to 20 media agencies. And this was almost became a self-funding method. And it was mostly based in commission. Then if we look at stage 3, and this is really where certainly we are going here in South Africa and in certain other markets across the continent, and largely in the more developed countries in Europe and in the Americas, this certainly has happened already, where it's become completely consumer orientated. So the focus of media is really understanding human behavior, developing insights that produce predictable, repeatable results. So if we understand that, that's the whole thing about the value of human insight. If we understand that, then let's build all our communication around the objectives of servicing those consumers' needs. The role of media planning is really to identify that human behavior and then develop a communication plan around that. And the resource in terms of how do we fund this, we've become a profit center. So these agencies now are able to deliver profit based on the work that we do, certainly in the evolved media agency. If we look at the full service agency model and the media specialist agency model, this slide really just goes through the sort of where we used to be and where we've gone to, and how the flow of work would happen. I'm not going to go into all of the detail now. Then as a career in media, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but largely this is what happens around the world, is that you can either start as a trainee, you become then a junior, then you decide either you're a buyer or a planner. And if you decide to go the planning route, you might decide you want to become a strategist, or you might want to move into become a more senior planner. And really, so the 3 funnels of strategy, planning, and buying is then born. and then you could be a director of either of those departments, and then you could potentially become the managing director of the media agency as well. So that kind of shows the hierarchy of a media career, and this is pretty much, well, I think in some more developed markets there are more specialist roles that are happening, but this is largely the case around the world. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the details of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, which is what the textbook does go into, but I think the key thing about what we've, during the yesterday stage, our focus was on exposure and impact. We wanted to get as much bang for your buck. Largely, this is still true today, but we've just evolved to more than just that. So the old way of looking at things was how do we break through? How do we break through the clutter to get in there? And so I think a lot of areas we still need to do this, but it's not only this that counts. If we did this, it would just get more and more expensive, and we'd end up causing a huge amount of clutter, and we wouldn't be effective in getting our results. Today, what we have moved more to is more of a channel planning approach, where we want to identify measurable goals that we can put planning ideas around, and then because they're measurable, after we've done the campaign, we can actually see if they've worked or not. And I think that is one of the chief role of channel planning, is it's media agnostic. So you don't think about what your media mix is going to be until you understand your objectives very well. And media agency remuneration is no longer commission-based, and we often charge resource-based fees, which is sometimes a lot more, it's a lot more accurate, I guess, to measure the agency's time around certain accounts, especially if it's a strategy or planning-heavy client. In this phase, it's really about how do we seem to be cost-efficient, cost-saving, but then truly being effective as well. So now we're not just trying to get as much bang for your buck, we're also trying to deliver on a client's business objectives and be successful based on those. So if we look at, even in the last 8 years, the election of the Pope, and this is a great slide because what it does is it shows we're having this exponential change that's happening in the media industry around the world right now, and that's obviously based largely on technology and how that's fueled consumer insights. So the consumer becomes an ever mobile target that we need to chase all the time. So the election of the Pope in 2005 and 2013, that's 8 years. And this picture was taken from exactly the same angle outside the Vatican, and you can just see the explosion of cell phone technology, user-generated content, uploading this data, sharing it. It's just changed momentarily. Let's imagine what's going to happen in the next 8 years. Really, so today does help make tomorrow, and we can see how, and it happens at an exponential rate as well. And increasingly, still in this present day, we are balancing left, right, and right brain thinking. You need to have a left brain thinking when it comes to analytical thoughts, logic, language, science, and maths. But then you also have to have, that is a mandatory almost, but then to be more effective, you need to also be able to think holistically, have intuition, be creative, and really understand what motivates the consumer. So we've moved now to, this is now the sort of today and the future about going forward. We want to understand the consumer. We want to look at moments that are relevant to the consumer and the brand. And then we find channels that can reach those moments, and then we activate on ideas. So if we look in the future, we now place the consumer at the center of everything. And as I said, in some markets around the world, this is certainly happening already. And for this reason, it's not just about channel planning, but it's about really investing in that consumer and understanding what they are doing, so we can build the best strategy around them. So the next sort of set of charts goes through the communication development process. And I think this is largely relevant to most markets around the world, but again, it would differ from place to place. Largely, you get a client brief. There's a challenge, there's the marketing strategy, there should be some kind of budget attached to that brief, and there should be some must-haves that they would like. Then what happens is the development phase, where the creative agency sits with the media agency, and we develop where we think the first sort of, where we think we should take this plan going forward. That should really happen in conjunction with each other. It's important that you do work with the creative agency at this point, so you don't end up working on a tangent and then you have to waste time later trying to catch up with each other's plans. Then the client should then approve that before you move forward. Then production will start happening on the creative, and then we'll start implementing the media. So by implementing media, we mean doing schedules, negotiations, and the like. We're making the plan happen. Well, then there'll be an exposure or engagement activation of sorts, whether it's in media or below the line. Then there might be an audit, because a lot of clients are audited globally. We then confirm if we got the media exposure we wanted, do we meet our objectives. We also, very importantly, we look at our results and see what learnings we can find, because it's not just about meeting objectives, but what can we do better next time around. At Vizeum, and I know at the other Power Brand entities, we all have our own brand planning or communication planning process. At Vizeum, it's called decisions, and what we do is we put the consumer well, first of all, the client challenge, which is the brief, at the center of everything, and our brand is at the center. And then we look at the consumer portrait, and we spend a disproportionate amount of time around that consumer portrait, because we certainly want to be an agency that's looking to the future and of the trend, and we need to be there. So spending a lot of time on the consumer upfront is very important, and I think that's true for most of the DAN entities around the world. Then we look at the consumer footprint side of things. We look at what is their communication relationship with different media out there. Then what is their consumption journey with the product. If we understand those two things, our strategy becomes a lot easier to solve. It means that we can really put together some solid building blocks for a great strategy. And then the strategy then takes place in the strategic decisions part, where we literally look at what our media mix is going to be, how we're going to reach our consumer against every of the major objectives. And then we put a plan together, we then activate the plan in activation decisions, and then we measure the performance of that plan. Then the mini planning process, I've kind of explained it to you at a very top line level, but the textbook does go into a lot more detail, so we urge you to go through that, understand it, and maybe compare and see how it works in your market as well, because there may be some interesting differences. So this slide is very important. It's about explaining the difference between the movement from mere exposure to effectiveness. And I think it kind of summarizes a lot of the trend that's happening at the moment. I think today, with the high fragmentation of media, which means that you end up paying a higher cost per thousand across the board, because you have to now go and use 50 media types instead of 5, it tends to get more expensive as you do that. We know that the brand objectives should determine our reach objectives, and the exposure alone does not generally produce startling results. So you can't always rely on outshouting your competitors in this day and age to be more effective. You might have a bigger share of voice, but sometimes it doesn't yield the results that you would have expected. For example, in previous times, an established car manufacturer might look at producing advertising campaigns, let's say with a 75% target market reach, maybe 4 bursts a year. Today, the same manufacturer would approach the task from a very different perspective by looking at their sales objective, because ultimately that's what their business needs to achieve. And for example, if the goal is 200 units, they have to sell 200 cars. A very extreme example of that would be the advertising goal would then be to reach 200 people that you know there's a 100% chance that they're going to buy that car. I mean, that's a very extreme example, but it just shows it becomes very objectives driven, and therefore then, if we understand how to reach those 200 people, that becomes our media plan. But I mean, that's just a very extreme example of the difference, but it really does put in perspective how we are moving going forward. And then the last thing I want to talk to you guys about today is what the textbook goes into is the managing, making consumer connections, or the 3 Cs. Now, this is quite nice because it just kind of puts things in a bigger picture of not just the media agency, but the entire advertising process. And in the middle, we find, well, firstly, the 3 things that we're looking at, the 3 Cs would be the contact, who is our target market, the who and the how, what platforms or activations are most suitable. We then look at the content, the context, so the point of exposure, or the when. When does this happen? The moment that we want to expose this. And then lastly is the content. What is the message? What is the advertising saying? And that's obviously where the creative agency comes into play as well. And the heart of all this is what happens is that when the contact, the context, and the content come together is the consumer connection. So content is the next C, and that's really about the message. It's what's required in order to leverage the consumer insight. And this is traditionally what the creative agency is focused on delivering, is the message. But increasingly we as the media agency need to really get an understanding of what that message is, because we can sometimes find media that can help deliver that message. So, for example, if we have a campaign that is all about a daily need to talk about a daily message, we can find media that is daily media to do that. Or if we need to find an environment that supports that message, we can do that as well. So if it's news or genres like dramas or sitcoms or comedy, there's a whole different variety that we can put that help deliver that content to. Then context is the last C, which is really about when would the target market be the most receptive to receiving this message. And this is quite key, and I think that in the decisions process we find that this is the consumer journey. If we understand the consumer journey about how they go and buy a car, or how they go to a service station, or how they buy a cereal, we can try and find the consumer touch points that are most relevant along the way to help deliver this context. So then the last thing we'd like to do in this chapter is give you guys an exercise to think about. There are exercises in the textbook as we go through, and this is one I just want to sort of highlight from this particular chapter. What we'd like you to do is to select a current advertising campaign that you believe succeeds in making a connection with the target market, and then unpack the 3 C's of contact, content, and context. Pay particular attention to each of the C's themselves and what individually they achieved, and then collectively, when you put them together, how did you think it worked from a campaign effectiveness perspective? So it must be a campaign that you believe was successful. But then we need to unpack it and see how the 3 C's would have delivered on the elements of why you think it was successful. Well, that's it for Chapter 1 today, and thanks for joining the Dentsu Aegis Network Training Academy. Goodbye.